On this podcast episode, I have with me Lauren Newton. She is the VP of People at Sanity. We're going to be talking about people and talent as an experiment. What do I mean by that? Well, you have to know when to take risks, where to take risks, where to be flexible, maybe treating some of your activities as a little bit of an experiment with a hypothesis and see what's going to happen and maybe change things for the better. I don't know. We're going to ask Lauren and see how she's navigated this. We're also going to talk about making sure you define the outcome. I think that's going to be key to this conversation because obviously if you're going to run an experiment, you have to know what you're hoping to get. Lauren, thanks for being on the show.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about this.
All right. Awesome. I know you got a fantastic background. People will see your LinkedIn. I know you worked at Medium, some great companies in the past. So obviously you've got a lot of experience to pull from. This topic, I really loved it when you proposed it. I think I don't hear a lot of people talking about the risks that they are taking within people and talent to kind of improve, move the needle forward, all those different things. I guess just the high level, just to kind of understand when we're talking about, people and talent as an experiment, obviously there's some context to that. Maybe you want to share that with everyone before we dive in.
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to. And this is, I guess, like a more recent sort of point of view that I've taken in my work. And I think maybe it's very specific to working in startups and more sort of flexible environments, but I aim to truly approach my work and my team's work as an experiment. We're very lucky here at Sanity, especially to exist in a space where we can experiment with the way that we execute our work, with the programs that we build for our employees, with the benefits and perks that we introduce, the tools that we use, et cetera. And I think of it very much as an experiment. And I think the extra context there is that, and the perception as well to keep in mind is that I think HR and people stuff in general has long been viewed as like this very old school, traditional sort of department that you have, and we're just there to sort of like run payroll and implement benefits and things like that. And there's this perception that things always have to sort of stay the same in HR, right? But I don't think that's true anymore, especially within the last 5 years-ish, right? I think I've noticed a lot of innovation, a lot of change that has come into the people in HR space that I appreciate being able to lean into. And as I said, I like to experiment with the work that we do. I like to encourage my team to try things and experiment in that way because we have the opportunity to do that in our work these days.
I love that. I guess a lot of times people and talent teams are very focused on process. And I think when you're super focused on process, you get a little bit tunnel vision. You're kind of focused on needing to make sure things are within the boundaries they need to be. And you got a lot of that to do. So that's most of your day. I love the fact that you're looking to make changes proactively, which is really what we're talking about. When you are looking at opportunities, you see an area where like, well, we can potentially move the needle. We're gonna test out some ideas. Obviously, it's a delicate balance. Don't want to upset the apple cart, but also you want to improve things. You want to move the measuring stick forward. How do you look at something and go, well, this is something we can? I don't want to use the word tinker with because that seems like it's unstructured, but something that we can try to improve.
Yeah, that's a good question. And like you said, and this goes back to feeling like HR and people work can be very like red tape and everything like that, or you can't innovate in the space because of compliance, because of, especially if you're a global company, you're thinking about the impacts to global employment law and all of that sort of stuff, right? There's a lot to think about when you're making changes to people's systems, programs, policies, et cetera, that you still need to think about, right? You still need to take them into consideration. You still need to take it seriously. What I aim to do, though, is take a look at where we can be flexible, and we do that by saying, okay, what is the outcome that we're aiming for? What is the ultimate goal? What are we trying to achieve? Best case scenario, what do we want this to look like at the end of it? And we need to open ourselves up to all of the different journeys that are possible for us to get to that point. I truly believe there are so many different solutions while still taking into consideration things like compliance and whatnot, that yes, it will sort of put some guardrails in place, right? But otherwise, our solution can look many different ways. And I think that a lot of people teams are not necessarily used to thinking in that way. We're used to being sort of taught to do it one way and just executing it over and over and over again. But I truly believe that there are so many different solutions that we can tap into. The other things to take into consideration outside of compliance and, global policies and whatnot are really like, will this work for our company? Will this work for us at the size that we are, at the stage that we are? Is this solution something that is going to be scalable? Is it a fair and equitable solution? Will it continue to be a fair and equitable solution down the line as we grow? So there are so many things to take into consideration, right? But you can think about those things as you iterate, as you map out what all of those different journeys could look like.
If you were going to maybe like take us next level detail down and look at that expected outcome. Interestingly, I know you've worked for startups, lots of engineering involved. Most engineering teams build test cases, test-driven development. That's common to them. I don't know if that's as common in talent and people, but I guess when you're looking at the expected outcome, kind of walk us through, how do you go through, well, before that, maybe two things. One, how do you define the problem statement, right? So, committing pen to paper or, keystroke to Google Doc. How do you do that? And how do you then make sure you've defined the business outcome? Because I think those are the start and end points. I think most people will be like, well, I know how it's something I'd like to change. And I think most people then get lost in the details of being able to actually really define it and know what to expect from it before they start that change process.
Yeah, so I generally start by identifying the first thing is like, what's broken, right? Is there something broken here? Is it actually broken? Meaning we have seen this fall apart in impactful ways more than one time? Or is it something that we just noticed that could be better? Right? Those are two different things that are, I think, important to distinguish between. And then once we understand what is broken, then I like to go through a process of thinking about, in the best case scenario, like, what is the ideal state that we actually want this thing to be? What is the ultimate outcome for this to be? And then I go back to the drawing board and say, okay, let's walk through all of the steps that it takes in this process, right? So if it's an onboarding process that is broken in some way, what are all of the steps that we've taken before the breakdown? What are all of the steps that are supposed to happen after that breakdown, and how are they impacted by that breakdown? And what are the things that we actually need to do? Where are the parts in that journey that we can influence, or that we can fix, or that we can tweak, or whatnot, right? Because some things, I think, especially in the people space, might be easily fixable, right? Might be easy to automate, right? But then there's some things that actually you can't really automate it. It's something that you're always going to have a person to push the button and all of that sort of stuff, right? But so we need to identify all the points in between to understand like what the actual process really looks like and what our ultimate outcome actually is. So I like to map that out. I like to write it out so that we actually see what that process looks like, where all the potential points of failure are, which one actually broke in the system, so that we can actually see what is it that we need to fix? Do we actually just need to fix one little thing in the journey, or do we need to revamp this thing from top to bottom? Right. I think it's so important to get a full picture of what that process looks like, and then layer onto that. Okay, this is what the process is, but what are the actual business impacts? Right. So, for example, one of the things that we're testing right now is automating our onboarding process, and we're testing it with a small group of hiring managers that we've sort of hand selected to say, "Hey, we want to test this new tool. We think," and this is a situation where nothing is necessarily broken, but it's something that we could improve quite a bit. And so we're testing this tool. One of the main things that we're doing this year is understanding where we can automate our work. So we're testing with a small pool of people. And the business impact, right, of this thing that we're testing is having higher quality touch points with new employees, automating our process so that there are less opportunities for process breakdown, giving an employee, and so that our like back end bookkeeping and stuff is more accurate, right? Everything is sort of automated and whatnot, right? Giving a person a smoother onboarding process will hopefully create a better overall employee experience, a better, an easier ramp up for this fantastic talent that we just brought in, which then leads to longer and positive engagement, through their first 3, 6, 8 months down the line. And where it could go wrong is if we really drop the ball with this person in their first week on board with us, they're going to have such a negative view. They're probably going to, their engagement is probably going to dip quite a bit. And realistically, they're not going to be able to hit the ground running as we need them to, because they're going to be so much less engaged. Or, the more tangible hiccup would be that we got their compensation wrong because we were entering it manually, and now their first paycheck that they were so excited to get is completely wrong. Right. So there are real business impacts that we have to think about as we are trying to change the system in some way.
I guess a question that popped into my mind is I definitely could see how you guys have the problem statement. You're looking for a desired outcome. You guys have picked the sample population to test from. I guess, how do you go from we've rolled this out to these couple of hand-selected managers to kind of improve the process to going, hey, this now we're confident works. Let's roll it out to the bigger or larger enterprise just because we want consistent processes. What do you have to see to make that decision?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think our approach is testing this over a short period of time, doing and doing a series of things after that. So I, and this is something that I've done in other places as well, I think it's so important to do a retro meeting with our own team to talk about this thing that we implemented or this project that we launched or whatever it is, and talk about how do we feel about it? What went really, really well? What could have gone so much better? What didn't work at all? How would we, if we could do it again, how might we change the way that we approach this work? So I will be doing a sort of retro on the implementation with this small group to understand, like, did we do this right? Did it actually work? How did it improve? How did it change our work, et cetera, et cetera? And then we'll also introduce some surveys, either some, form-based surveys or one-on-one interviews with the hiring managers that we've partnered with the person who was onboarded as well, to get some insights around like what was that experience like for you as a manager? Did you have everything that you needed in this process? As an onboarding buddy, did you have everything that you needed? What would you have wanted instead? Or where could we have supported you more? Was this tool that we used intuitive? Right? Or was it really hard to navigate? All of those sort of little things we'll take into consideration as we consider is this something that we can roll out across the entire company? Now, realistically, I think, there's probably a world where if we do choose to roll it out to the entire company, we might do it in waves, right? We might introduce it to first the groups that we assume might be like sort of the early adopters of this type of automation, of this type of tool, to sort of introduce it there first and have more use cases of a positive experience in doing that, right? I think especially in the people space, when we're thinking about programming, when we're thinking about workshopping and whatnot, especially in the startup space, when you have a small but mighty team, it's so crucial to introduce programs, tools, processes, et cetera, to a core group of people first to get them on board. And then they can help evangelize what we're doing to the rest of the organization. So when time allows for it, I really appreciate sort of rolling these sort of things out incrementally.
Interesting. I love the process around it. I love the fact that there's a plan that is actually incrementally built. You deliver the final solution. I guess when you're working with your team in enforcing these changes, sometimes it's just hard for your own process to change. I mean, if you ask me to change something that I've been used to for years, I'm going to find it hard. So when it comes to your team embracing those changes, because obviously the hiring managers are going to look at your team as well, how do you help your team change their day-to-day? Because they might be one of the biggest impacted groups of all these shifts as well.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good question. I think I aim to do two things. I think especially when the people space, oftentimes we are very process-driven people. We like a process, we like a schedule, we like things to be real clear, and we like to stick to the plan, right? And it can be really uncomfortable to shake things up. It can be really uncomfortable to change the ways in which we're working. Also, I think that people teams are usually in a state of prioritizing and reprioritizing their day-to-day work between what is like the keep the lights on work versus what is the like project work that we want to work on, that we have to work on, et cetera. It's a delicate balance, and to throw in a process change or an experiment can be sort of jarring, right? And so I aim to help the team really, and this is any team that I lead, like really focus on what are the actual priorities and how do we think about priorities? Do you just think that you have to get this thing done by today, or can it actually be done 5 days from now? Let's really think through what our priorities are, ruthlessly prioritize that list, and understand where we can actually make more space to give ourselves some room to experiment with something. Because with experiments, you have to account for things going wrong, or you need time to think about things. You need to really bake in enough time to be flexible in that way. So I try to help my teams think through what that flexibility looks like and what that prioritization looks like. At Sanity in particular, one thing that I have really, really loved is that across the org, and especially at the core management level, we get really specific about the things that we are working on and why we are working on them. Our approach to goal setting and road mapping is really, really intentional. And so I try to instill that in my own team as well. You know, as an executive team, we're sort of forcing ourselves to choose 3 things that we're going to work on that are like the top priority for this month. And then next month, we see what the next 3 are, et cetera, et cetera. So I also aim to set up my team's work in that way as well. Like, let's really whittle down the things that the core things that we are working on. It might only be 4 things that if we do nothing else this quarter, if we only need to get those 4 things right, we're golden, right? And that's a very different way than I've worked before. I think that's a very different way than a lot of people teams are used to working, because so many times we have to do everything under the sun, plus the project work, plus all of the sort of crisis work that comes along with being a people person. And so I really appreciate just leaning into having like ultra focus with what we're working on, making sure that what we're working on is amounting to these goals that we agreed on for like our quarterly metrics or whatnot. And that is what helps us make the room and space for experimenting. Usually the experiments, all the time, the experiments are going to be around some bigger goal that we have in mind that we like want to move the needle on, right? So if I'm creating an environment where I'm saying these four things are the only things that are going to like push us forward in this quarter, then it allows us to do that thing of ruthlessly prioritizing to make sure that we have enough space to experiment with something that will move the needle on that big thing that we're looking to move.
Absolutely. I guess the follow-up to that, as I was kind of listening to you, was, and I understand you have certain initiatives you're picking. How do you manage that roadmap so that you can account for those changes and the daily work and the fire drills? Because obviously every people and talent individual out there, professional, probably was like, well, I have those initiatives, I can never get to them because there's always something coming up. How do you, as an executive, stay focused? And then how do you help your team and insulate them so they can implement the necessary changes?
Yeah. I will be candid. It's a work in progress, right? This is, I think, I've been with Sanity for about 8 months now. And so that's a clear like change in leadership that me and my team are taking into consideration, that we're getting to know each other as we work with each other, as we do these really hard things together, et cetera. We need to, it takes time to like get in the flow of working with each other and understanding how we work best. So it's a work in progress for sure. One of the things that we are, at the executive level here at Sanity, every week we are talking about our monthly goals. We're talking about our quarterly goals. We're talking about where we're at with those, where we need help and support, et cetera. And we have a tracker that we sort of mark as like where we are in the process with something that I find really useful. We're doing a version of that within our people team as well that we intend to introduce, where it's a project tracker. We have our annual goals, and then we've broken those down into if these are the goals, what are the what action are we taking? What projects do like fall under this umbrella, this goals umbrella, and like what do we need to execute along the way to achieve this goal? And we'll create a larger tracker for those projects that we will check in on both weekly and then monthly to see how we're doing, to ask for support, et cetera, et cetera. The first step in that was creating all of our goals and then sort of making assumptions around realistically what quarter are we going to deliver on this thing, and based on that assumption, what work has to be done in order for us to meet that goal of meeting that project or meeting that goal at that point in time. So it's a work in progress, but I think it's going to take us mindfully tracking the work that we're doing, being honest about where we are in the process, understanding what the entire sort of timeline could look like, and adjusting along the way, and constantly communicating with each other, because there are so many moving parts. Most of the time, most of the work that we're doing is going to be a completely collaborative effort as well, right? So identifying an owner for who's actually driving it forward, and then tracking it along the way to keep ourselves honest.
I like that quite a bit. I think the hardest part is to have the time to do these things, because obviously I'm sure there's no end in the amount of requests that come in. I guess the final question to just ask you, when you're talking to stakeholders and you're looking to make these changes, obviously the end hope is that you're going to improve the process and for them, not just your team, but they're going to also see a benefit. When you're approaching a stakeholder to get them to commit and participate and stay committed, I guess that's the other component. How does that conversation typically look? Because I think that staying committed part for the stakeholder is where success and failure is really crucial.
Yeah, that's such a good question. So, and I think that this could look a little bit different depending on where you are as a people leader, what type of environment you're in, how long you've been there, whether you sit directly on the executive team or not, et cetera, right? But I aim to approach every conversation as sharing an idea and asking for input. We're about to introduce a much larger engagement survey to the company. And it's the first time that we're going to be doing an engagement survey of this size. We've only done very small ones before. And instead of going forward and saying, we're doing an engagement survey, look out for the link, I'm going to want you to take it to executive team or stakeholder or whatever it is, right? We're instead going to them and saying, we want to build this thing. Here are some of the questions that we could ask. Does this meet your needs? Is there anything specific that you want us to include in this survey that you are looking to tap into with your specific department, right? Like, how would you question this? What has your experience been like taking these surveys in the past? How have you used them before? Like, how have you taken the data from an engagement survey for your department and used it well? Like, how has it served you before? So making it a conversation and inviting input, I think, is so key to building a really strong stakeholder relationship. I think, oftentimes, well, I guess this is true of anybody in their own profession. It's really easy to go into a conversation as the expert, as the SME, and say, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm doing. Like, I know what I'm doing, right? I'm just letting you know, right? But it's so much more effective to your relationships and also to your work and the outcomes if you approach these sort of conversations with curiosity and with a genuine invitation for their input. It goes back to experimenting, staying flexible, being open to other people's ideas, and knowing that they might have something to add that will make your work that much better, right? On the other side of that is the feeling that you create for that stakeholder, where they're like, oh yeah, this survey is out. There's my question. There's a series of questions that I told them to input. They're the edits that I've, talked about, or whatever it is. There's that section that I helped build. And then they're more attached to it, right? Like, they feel like they're more bought in. They feel like they have a stake in it. And they can then become that evangelist and going back to their teams and saying, hey, this is really important. I am going to get really good information out of this. I really want my team to take it. And they'll be able to sort of be an extension of the people team to help push surveys, programs, et cetera, forward, because they were directly involved with building it.
Awesome. I love the detail. I love the examples along with it, because I think a lot of times people want change management processes, but they always don't know where to start. And I think you've done a great job. If somebody wants to reach out to pick your brain on something you've mentioned, process, anything in particular, what's a good way of touching base with you?
Yeah, and I love talking about this stuff. Best way to reach me is probably just connecting with me on LinkedIn, connecting there, sending me a note, sending me a connection, and then hopefully we'll be able to set up more time to sort of dive into this sort of stuff.
Okay, awesome. Lauren, thank you for coming on. Thank you for sharing with everyone.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, I think Lauren covered a lot of ground when it comes to approaching a problem, trying to find solutions, getting buy-in, stakeholder management. We covered a ton. So I think this was a great episode. Share with somebody else that could benefit. I'd appreciate that. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the podcast is doing for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.